Coming up on this week's podcast, can McLaren quickly learn from its Qatar strategy howler? Should Oscar Piastri still believe the title is possible? Is Lando Norris going to sink or swim in Abu Dhabi? And will Max Verstappen complete the most remarkable of F1 title comebacks? It's time for the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast, looking back at last weekend's Qatar Grand Prix, but also looking ahead to the title decider this weekend in Abu Dhabi. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by the dynamic duo that is 2023 Young Journalist of the Year, Sam Absolutely Coop, and the man, the myth, the almighty legend in another hotel. It is, of course, lead editor Ian Parks. Ian, quite clearly, you're not in the UK. You've been in Qatar last weekend. For the Qatar Grand Prix, you remain in the Middle East because, of course, you are heading directly to the Yas Marina Circuit.
Well, not directly to the Yas Marina Circuit.
But yeah.
Go and find Dubai Airport, yeah. But yes, it's we now have what we've been praying for all along, and a tumultuous climax to the season that, quite honestly, I don't think anybody would have seen coming going into the summer break. And here we now have a three-way battle for the title. The first time we've had more than two drivers going into the final race of the season, still in with a chance of winning the title since 2010, when we had four on that occasion, although Lewis Hamilton was a real long shot. But nevertheless, it was an opportunity. He was still in the fight. I digress just slightly. But yes, we now have Max, Lando and Oscar, all with this opportunity of becoming drivers' champion on Sunday evening in Abu Dhabi. For Max Verstappen, it's the possibility of becoming a five-time world champion. For Lando and Oscar, it's their opportunity to secure their first driver's crown. It could not be more exciting. I can only imagine getting into the paddock at Yas Marina on Thursday morning, and as the build-up continues over the course of the weekend, the anticipation, the expectancy, the electricity within that paddock is likely to go through the roof until those five red lights go out on Sunday evening.
It is going to be a weekend to remember. And of course, Lando still very much his to lose, has a 12-point lead over Max Verstappen. If Lando finishes on the podium, doesn't matter what Max or Oscar do, that will be that. Lando will be world champion. Much harder for Oscar. He's 16 points adrift, so he must finish first or second, basically, and hope things go his way in regard to Max and Lando. But Sam, it's remarkable. After Zandvoort, Oscar had a really healthy lead. After Brazil, Lando had a really healthy lead. Max hasn't led the title at all, yet here we are talking about the possibility he could become a record equaling five-time world champion in terms of consecutive championships.
He could indeed, and he's starting to look remarkably like Kimi Räikkönen at the moment. Obviously, in 2007, when Kimi came from behind, beat two McLarens at the final race to take his one and only title, but also 2010, as Ian mentioned, Sebastian Vettel didn't lead that title until he crossed the line in Abu Dhabi, and so he could well emulate Sebastian Vettel in the same breath. And I think we're all kind of sitting, fairly pleased here, having not really at any point absolutely definitively ruled out Max. We always kind of said, look, until the math says otherwise, you can't rule him out because he is Max. And I mean, the proof is in the pudding, right? You just can't with someone of Max's caliber, of his ability. And he is maximised bar the Spanish Grand Prix, and that is critical, and we may well get onto that later in the race, later in the podcast.
This is Sam's bone of contention. This is Sam's real bone of contention, folks. But yeah,
but that is the one time this season, and probably over the last 2 years, really, where Max has not got the absolute maximum that was on offer for him over a Grand Prix weekend.
what I think is brilliant, and obviously we have so much to discuss. Quite clearly, for those watching or listening, this is a podcast dedicated to the title decider and, of course, the title showdown. All things Lando, all things Oscar, all things Max. If you're wanting other topics, this probably isn't the podcast for you, I'll be completely honest, but nevertheless, it's going to be a good one. And very quickly, before we get on to our 2 fun questions to get us started, I always check the comments on our YouTube videos across the podcast, the F1 updates. If you're watching this podcast and don't watch our F1 updates, please do, because they are very, very good. We had a brilliant comment from Linko, who said, "Too funny, having a laugh here. We now have Nick, only time will tell Golding, Sam, absolutely Coop, and I've never noticed this before, and so I've now watched videos back. And no. Ian, as I say, Parks."
Oh.
And I'd never noticed that.
That's going to be playing on your mind now.
I saw that and then watched videos back and I was like, oh wow, he actually does, and we've never picked it up. But that made me chuckle. Ian, as I say, do you think you say that a lot?
I must know if somebody's picked it up. Do I say that as I say?
Yeah, so you're Ian, as I say, Parks. That's your slogan.
I know I say a few times when you've said something and I go, as you've said, Nick. I know I do that a few times because obviously I'm just repeating exactly what you've said just to reiterate and make the point. But I've never really noticed that about myself, saying that particular phrase. Okay.
I'm glad.
Tell you what, it could be a hell of a lot worse.
There's a fun video idea in this of our favourite kind of, mannerisms from people within F1. Like Christian Horner, for example, would always go, "Look, the thing is," and he always does it, always answers every question. We're going, "Look." It was just so. I mean, yeah, all of us have them, don't we? At the end of the day.
Was that your Christian Horner impression, Sam? By the way,
no, not my best. It was.
I thought it was all right. It was okay.
It's been a while since we've heard him.
It has been right. We of course need to do our fun questions to really get our minds going, and we've got 2, both from our stat man Jake Nicol. The reason there are 2 is you'll understand why following the first one. How many times has the F1 title been decided in the final race? Of course, excluding this weekend.
I think it's about 12. I'll go 12.
Ian's going 12.
15.
You're both a million miles away. The F1 title has been decided in the final race on 30 occasions. This weekend This weekend will be
way higher than I thought. Yeah.
This weekend will be the 31st. So this leads into the second question. You can probably see where this is going. On those 30 occasions, how many times has the driver who entered as the championship leader not won the title?
So in other words, the person who wasn't leading the championship won the title.
Effectively, yes.
I think Nick phrased the question fair. In all honesty,
yes, thank you.
It wasn't meant to be as pointed as.
Let's go half. Let's go 15.
I was going to go the same.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to go.
Split down the middle.
I'll go a third.
So you're a third. So what you're saying?
Sorry, 10. 10 of 30.
Okay, thank you. It's a bit. Well, you're absolutely bang on the money, Sam. On 10 times, which is staggering. So very, very quickly: 1950, 1964, 1976, 1981, 1983, 1986, 1997, 1999, 2007, and of course 2010. Jake, thank you very, very much for that. But as you now understand why there was 2 questions, so it goes to show that yes, Oscar might be 16 points adrift, but weirder things have happened and are more often than you may realise. Anyways, right.
Because just to quickly interject, the 2007 and 2010 title victories for Kimi and Sebastian Vettel, they were both third in the standings going into that final race, and they ended up as champions.
It's a good omen, isn't it? Then the last 2 times, is it going to be third time?
It's the driver in third, yeah.
Interesting. Only time will tell if Oscar does it. Anyways, right, so much to discuss. Sam, you can go first. Your biggest takeaway from Qatar?
My biggest takeaway for Qatar is that, in many ways, McLaren haven't learned. I was speaking to Jake about this because he was saying that, you can forgive these kind of strategic errors or these rookie errors when a team first kind of gets to that level, as McLaren have been for 18 months plus, but they're still making those same errors when they first encounter a situation. And I actually said this point, I think it was after our British Grand Prix podcast in 2024, that it feels like every time McLaren come up against something new, they don't get it right at the first time we're asking. And we saw that here. I mean, it's an incredibly unique, incredibly specific scenario that we not only had over the weekend, but for a safety car to fall on lap 7. But it's almost so specific that surely they ran through that. Every other team was saying, yeah, we had our safety car window opening at lap 7 because with the 2-stop mandate, that was the earliest point in which you could stop and then still get 2 stops and get to the end. So they would have covered it to death, surely. But the overarching point is that McLaren seems to be so hell-bent on operating as a single-cell organism. It's almost like they make a decision about Oscar and Lando at the same time, related to each other. It's all part of the kind of one main decision. Whereas I feel like they need to be going, what do we do with the first car? Who's ahead? What's the best strategy for them? And then you go to the second car and you go, following that, what do we then want to do here? So what would have been the best thing to do would just go, it makes sense to pit Oscar. He's ahead. He'll come out ahead if he pits, unless someone else doesn't do that, in which case they've got to kind of hope that things fall in their favour later on. And it's not racing the race that's right in front of you. And then we address, do we then want to double stack Lando, or do we want to split and see what Lando can do out front? They're so intertwined, so interlinked with how they're doing those decisions that they're not thinking them through clearly. It's almost like this decision making has kind of rotted across the pit wall to the extent that they're making these horrifically wrong decisions. It felt wrong at the time, and it was confirmed to be an absolute disaster of a call by the outcome of the race. So yeah, that's my main take home. Is that they just are not learning from the mistakes of past events, and you're not going to win titles that way.
Ian, for you, biggest takeaway?
Mine was actually going to be along very similar lines, discussing that McLaren pit stop situation, because it was pretty evident that they did not want to compromise either driver, because full well, if they'd have brought in Oscar first, Lando would have absolutely kicked off and wondering what the hell was going on. Why wasn't he brought in, particularly given the race, the way it unfolded? Conversely, of course, if they'd left Oscar out and they brought Lando in, and of course Lando had gone on to potentially win that Grand Prix because he'd made that pit stop, then my God, can you imagine the fallout of that would have followed, with the criticisms and calls from the fans saying, yet again, Lando Norris bias, British bias, you're so full of it, McLaren, etc., etc. What are you doing? You're compromising Oscar. And quite clearly, to avoid all of that, and bearing in mind, it was a very short period of time in which the McLaren strategy team had to make that call, they decided, for the sake of parity and for the sake of avoiding bringing both drivers in at the same time, double stacking and naturally compromising Oscar to a certain extent, even though it would have been the best call to have made and he wouldn't have lost too much time or too many positions on track, they decided to keep both of them out. And as we quite clearly saw, for me, that is arguably the biggest catastrophic strategic mistake that has been made across the entirety of this season. McLaren will be very, very lucky if either Lando or Oscar does go on to win the title, and we are not discussing that in even more depth next weekend after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, should Max win the title, and that mistake proves their ultimate downfall.
For me, very quickly, my biggest takeaway is I think it's so evident that Max Verstappen is getting under the skin of McLaren. Lando Norris, so many times across Qatar, was bringing Max up in conversation, speaking about the way Max is addressing things, the comment he's been making. Lando's not really done that in the past. He's very much focused on himself and the things he can control. Max himself is making more and more just little comments, which... yeah, it's the mind games. You can see what he's trying to do. He made a brilliant line in the post-race press conference where he effectively said he only thinks about winning, he doesn't focus or think about losing. It's just little things like that. You do wonder, is that a little jibe towards McLaren? You know, are they McLaren more prioritised on not losing a race rather than prioritising the fact they actually win it? It's just, we didn't see this earlier in the year, and it goes to show just how seriously I think McLaren now take Max as a threat. Did they perhaps not see him as a threat when it was a 104-point gap between Max and Oscar at the time? Maybe not, but that has proven to be and I'll use the word again, catastrophic mistake, because Max could very well pull off the unthinkable. Sam?
Well, what's interesting is that after the Las Vegas Grand Prix and before we had the double disqualification for McLaren, so at this point, it's a 30-point gap between Lando and Oscar and a 42-point gap between Max and Lando. And Lando was so focused in his comments to Sky, so focused on Max. You got this overwhelming impression that he was far more concerned about Max and Red Bull than he was about what was happening on the other side of his garage. And you can understand that to a degree because that's completely outside of his control. And, you know, he understands much more of what's going on with Oscar and his side of the garage. But even when Max was not his primary challenger for the title, he was more concerned with Max. And now that he is, that's just going to amp up, and Max will know how to play the game because, you know, everything Max is doing is this kind of like, you know, I don't care, I'm not bothered, I'm impenetrable, you cannot hurt me. And that's exactly the point. There's nothing you can do to get inside the head of someone who is so adept at playing the mind games and just going, it doesn't matter to me. I'm not concerned. It matters a hell of a lot more to you, and that's going to be I'm going to be the architect of your downfall using that strategy, because mind games and mentality come into this so heavily at this stage of the season.
Before we carry on, we of course do need to look back at our Qatar predictions, and of course in Abu Dhabi we're going to be seeing a world champion crowned. However, unfortunately, the Racing News 365 Predictions Championship will not be going to the season finale. Reason being is that the Steve, who represented the fans from the Netherlands, picked up 3 points. Sam, you got 6 points for getting Yuki Tsunoda in P10. I'll give you your moment. It did happen. It did happen.
So sad, and we'll get to it at the end of the podcast. For the last time, I'll be making that prediction for a while for this next race, but never mind.
Anyways, we'll move on to that later on. Ian, you got 4 points. Basically, we all said Max Verstappen would win, so that everybody got at least 3 points. I got 7 points. I had a Max win, McLaren fastest lap, and Oscar to finish in third. Of course, he got second, so 1 point for being one above or below, which means in terms of the standings, it is really, really tight everywhere apart from the top. It is Sam in last on 105. Myself and the fans are on 109. Ian is so far in the lead on 138 and is the inaugural Racing News 365 Predictions Championship. Ian, congratulations. A few words, quick speech.
Bowled over, boys. What can I say? I wish there was a trophy here that I could pick up and show everyone, but we don't have one yet. But nevertheless, smash the lot of you. Bring it on next season. That's all I can say when I'll be defending my title.
Will you be taking the number one?
There you go. You can have this one.
That's lovely. Thank you, Sam.
Sam showing off his Motorsport UK trophy. Right, anyway, let's get on. Ian, congratulations. And of course, yes, we will give you our best efforts next year, but we do at least have a good fight for second, although no one really cares about that. Let's get on to the big and juicy talking points. Of course, we'll go over Lando, Oscar and Max in more detail, but let's look at the McLaren mistake in a bit broader at the moment, because what's really fascinating is listening back to the radio communication to their drivers. They pointed out, they kept saying the flexibility, that by not pitting, they'd have flexibility over their rivals. And it kind of felt like that flexibility was them gambling, betting almost on there being another safety car, a red flag, who knows. We actually had nothing after that initial safety car. It was a pretty clean race, despite all the fears of tyre blowouts, tyre cuts, and you know what. But it felt, Ian, that McLaren put all their eggs in that uncontrollable basket of there being a safety car or red flag. And what was really fascinating is listening to the audio afterwards, and it was something you pointed out. Aston Martin, I think that's the right thing, correct me if I'm wrong, had already planned to potentially pit from lap 7. Had McLaren not done so?
It's not so much they'd planned to pit on lap 7. They planned what happens if there is a safety car on lap 7. And lo and behold, there was a safety car on lap 7. Don't get me wrong, folks. They obviously planned for what happens if there's a safety car on this lap, on that lap, etc., etc. But nevertheless, it was in their strategy planning if there's a safety car on lap 7. And of course, it was the ideal, if you think about it, time for a safety car to take place, because that then lent itself into these 25 lap stints that Pirelli had prescribed pre-Grand Prix for an entire set of tyres to last across the course of a Grand Prix weekend. But of course, every team and driver went into that Grand Prix with a fresh set of hards and 2 fresh sets of mediums, ensuring that those tyres could only go for 25 laps during that Grand Prix. And that, of course, is pretty much exactly how it played out. Many teams went medium, soft, or they started off with a medium, and then, of course, they went to a hard or a medium hard, etc., etc. So it played out perfectly that the first lap was 7 stints. It left 50 laps. That guaranteed that across that 50 laps, there would be 2 specific 25 lap stints for whichever tyre then followed, be it the medium hard or the hard medium. And for whatever reason, McLaren, and as I've discussed, as Sam has extensively mentioned as well, just didn't go for it. They seemed convinced in their own head that it would play out. And actually, we were discussing in our Slack channel during the Grand Prix, I actually thought it would play out, because the way it was going, I thought that with Max being on hards right at the end, and then the McLarens pitting onto softs, the tyre delta would be such that even if there was a, let's say, as it turned out to be, a 14-16 second gap, that they would have a really good opportunity of trying to reel him in at the death, even though we know the Qatar circuit is hugely difficult to overtake. But nevertheless, being on softs compared to hards, they might have had the opportunity. So that was my thinking at that particular time. But then, of course, you could see the way the stints were playing out, and that Max was really performing superbly on that middle stint, especially on that medium tyre. And then when he switched to the hard tyre, and it was actually probably an even better working tyre than the medium proved to be, that, okay, he's absolutely got this. You called it, Nick. You said in the messaging, Max has got this. And it turned out to be exactly the case. Yeah, well done, mate. Better than your predictions for the rest of the season, that's for sure. But boom! Oh, I'm sorry. That was a low blow. But you know what I mean. But nevertheless, it's just quite extraordinary that McLaren didn't go down this route. And it's quite clear, I think, to all of us now, they didn't go down that route because they didn't want to prioritise one driver over another, because, as Sam has again extensively discussed, they've just got into this has got into their system now that they can't afford to do this. They effectively prioritised one driver over another in Hungary this year, when they gave Lando the alternate strategy that Oscar was severely unhappy about. And then, of course, they prioritised Lando in the pit stop phase at Monza and asked Oscar to step back because Lando was running in second place. And just because he had a slower pit stop, they felt it incumbent upon themselves to say, Oscar, let Lando back through. That pit stop shouldn't have gone like that for him the way it did, but we'd like you to be fair. And of course, this has been another one of those things that's really undermined McLaren, because even Oscar, as we've discussed with that race, thought, hold on, it was a racing incident. Surely, racing incidents, we just let them play out. That obviously greatly affected Oscar, as we know, at that particular time. So here, quite clearly, McLaren wanted to play absolutely by the book with both drivers, refused to bring in one and leave out the other, because they knew what would have happened with with regard to the comments that would have followed if it had all gone pear-shaped for the driver that would have been heavily compromised. So instead, they just left both out. But ultimately, that proved to be, and we'll use the phrase again, and this probably will figure in our headline, I would assume, folks, at the end of this podcast, a catastrophic mistake.
Just very quickly, Sam, looking ahead to Abu Dhabi, before we look at the title contenders specifically, in terms of McLaren, they can't change anything now. They've still got both their drivers in title contention. Yes, okay, Oscar is 16 points adrift, but has every chance of winning the title should things happen. We saw last year, of course, Max and Oscar both spin at the first corner. Imagine the scenes if that was to be Max and Lando or Oscar and Lando, who knows? But McLaren has left it so late now. And we've said a few times and discussed the topic whether they should try something different. You made the comment yourself, they're kind of acting and behaving like one organism across both sides of the garage. That's going to have to stay the same, isn't it now? Because you can't make a change at this last minute. It's almost a fear to do something different on either side of the garage.
But also the boldest and sometimes the most important thing to do in sport, and this isn't just in F1, is to, say it's the Super Bowl. Sometimes the strategy that has got you to the Super Bowl is not the right strategy for the Super Bowl. And you have to be gutsy in knowing at the 11th hour if that is now the time to change the very approach that got you to that position. And that is something that McLaren may need to kind of acquiesce with over these next few days, because to kind of expand on that single-celled organism point, each driver needs their half of the garage, their race engineer, their strategy guys to be advocating for them. Within the team, they need their guys going, I'm on Oscar's car, I'm on Lando's car, we need to do what we can to get them in position. As long as it's not to the detriment of the other side of the garage, I think that's absolutely fine. I think that's probably the way to play it, because there's so many scenarios and it's almost impossible to go through all the various kind of permutations in a 45-minute podcast. But McLaren have still been very clear that they are not, whilst both drivers are still, as Andreas Stella says it, in condition to win, so basically in play, in the fight, they are not going to make a call that would adversely affect the other. There are scenarios in which they could ask one to move aside for the other, but that's only if that the driver they're asking to give up the position is not in with a shout at that point, isn't able to win from that position. I think that is the essence of what he was saying last night. And Ian, do correct me if I'm wrong, but that was definitely my interpretation of what he was saying.
Yeah.
So there is some leniency, there is some leeway, but ultimately they will not waver from their stance. And I think that's the element that they really can't change at this point, because they've been so hell-bent on it. And if they were to change at the last minute and still lose the title, everyone's going to turn around and go, if you'd done that 3 or 4 races ago, we wouldn't be in this situation. And that would almost be worse in many ways if they hadn't then committed to that and seen it through to the end. So it's really difficult. But yeah, in terms of Abu Dhabi as well, the 14-point swing that Oscar has now lost to Max in Qatar is hugely crucial, massively so, because Oscar's gone from having a 10-point advantage over Max to being at a 4-point deficit. He could have, Max could have won in Abu Dhabi and Oscar finished second, and he would have taken the title. And now that isn't the case, and it's just made it so much more murky, so much more grey, and so much more difficult for them to navigate across both sides of the garage, because they've advantaged Max in such a way through the complete miscalculation and misstep that happened in Qatar.
To quickly look at,
I'm just going to chuck this in because this just into my head. If you think about it, guys, the Max Oscar swing since the end of the Dutch Grand Prix, it's 108 points in 8 Grand Prix. That is frightening. I don't think
huge.
I mean, there possibly will have been, but I don't think there's been too many turnarounds like that throughout Grand Prix history. Certainly since the current points system came into play. It's just unbelievable, because at that stage, I spoke to Raymond Vermeulen, Max's manager, after the Grand Prix in Qatar on Sunday evening, and he basically said that coming out of that race, going into the summer break especially, but coming out of that race, it looked done and dusted for them. But how the world has changed since then was his phrase. 108 points in 8 Grand Prix. Just thought I'd throw that in there.
Still has, of course, 12 more to make up, potentially 13, depending on where they finish. Just to quickly look at the standings, Lando Norris leads on 408. Max Verstappen is 12 adrift on 396. Oscar is 16 adrift of his teammate on 392. For Oscar, it's quite simple. He must finish first or second and hope other things go his way. It's unlikely for Oscar to do it, but as we've said, weirder things have happened in Abu Dhabi. For Max, it's a bit easier, still difficult. However, if Max wins the season finale, Lando must finish in the top 3 to become world champion. If he doesn't, Max is world champion once again. If Max finishes in second, Lando must be in the top 7 to be world champion. Below the top 7, Max is world champion again. If Max is in third, Lando must finish in the top 8. Guess what? If he's not in the top 8, Max is world champion again. Fourth or worse, and Max cannot become world champion. Reason being, if Lando, let's say, doesn't finish and Max finishes in fourth, yes, Max and Lando would end the season level on points. However, they also have the same number of wins, but Lando has more second place finishes. As a result, Lando would still be crowned world champion. Let's discuss Lando. Ian, I'll come to you first. Let's go through the 3 title contenders before, of course, ending with the final predictions of 2025. And it's a fascinating one with Lando because really, kind of since Singapore, he's been ruthless. He's not really made any mistakes, yet across Qatar, we saw several across both sprint qualifying, the normal qualifying, the race itself as well. Are these nerves starting to get into Lando a little bit? Do you think he can handle the pressure of this remarkable situation he finds himself in going into the season finale? It is still his to lose. Let's not, beat around the bush.
Still his to lose. I mean, you got to think that with the strategy called by McLaren, he lost almost certain 3 points. Let's say he would have gone on to finish third, for argument's sake, if they'd brought both cars in double stacked, and you would assume he would have had that degree of pace advantage, or within the second phase of the pit stop, or with us in the second pit stop, should I say, that McLaren might have got him back ahead and back onto the podium in third place. So, yes, he's made mistakes, but yes, he's still put in a strong performance on a track that was always going to favour Oscar. And it was, Andrea Stella mentioned it post-qualifying on Saturday, that with this high degree of grip around the Qatar circuit, the Losail International Circuit, this was always going to be a track that was going to favour Oscar. They are conditions in which he brings out the best in him, shall we say. As the phrase that Andrea used was, it suits him more naturally, whereas we saw in particular Austin and Mexico City, low grip conditions, they favoured Lando more over Oscar. Oscar really struggled, and also Oscar really struggled with the car just completely as a whole across those 2 Grand Prix weekends. And if he does lose this title, they will be the 2 weekends in particular where he will look back on and think, just what on earth was not right with me in the car at that track. Okay, yes, low grip conditions, whatever, but there was just something off with me in the car. It just wasn't where I wanted it to be. But just relating to your specific Lando question, and does he have it? I think yes, he does. I think we've seen that over the course of the previous few Grand Prix leading into Qatar. He's had built up this head of steam. He's looked strong. He's been strong in his mind as well. You could tell there's been quite a clear psychological shift. But now this is a different level of pressure going into this final Grand Prix. I remember the 2007 Grand Prix really well, and I'm going to use that to lend itself into this. I was in Brazil for that Grand Prix, and Lewis Hamilton, of course, led the title. It was that 3-way fight. Got Fernando behind him. It got Kimi behind him in the championship. And okay, it was a rookie season for Lewis. So that's the discrepancy here between Lewis back then and Lando now. Lando, of course, has had a good number of seasons behind him, but nevertheless, This is a completely new scenario for Lando. He's not faced this at all. I remember on the grid, pre-Grand Prix, Lewis was sheltering under an umbrella because the heat was strong, so he got somebody covering him with an umbrella for the shade. And I just remember looking at his face back then, and I was thinking, you look nervous. You look nervous. You could tell there was something about Lewis that had not quite been there at any stage previously over the course of that season. He was a strong rookie. He was a very strong rookie that year. He looked confident. But at that particular time, I just thought, this is something a little bit different about you. And of course, the way things played out in that Grand Prix, it just unraveled for him really sadly. And of course, he wasn't able to get over the line that year, but that made him so much stronger. And then, of course, when it came to 2008, it was a different scenario for him. And whatever you think about 2008 and where the whole season played out with Crashgate in Singapore and Felipe Massa's court case, etc., nevertheless, 2008, Lewis was a different character going into that final Grand Prix compared to the character I saw on that grid in 2007. And I'm just wondering now, fast forwarding to 2025, just how Lando is going to feel on that grid at that particular time. Because this was, yes, there was an opportunity in Qatar. This is the opportunity, the one he has to take, compared to, yes, he had a chance in Qatar, but it didn't quite fall for him. This is it now. There's no other cards to play after Abu Dhabi. It's all or nothing with this Grand Prix.
Lando is the title favourite. Sam, Max Verstappen is the dark horse. From 104 to 12, he must feel now the title is on. And actually, his biggest advantage could well be it's 2 McLarens against 1 Red Bull.
It's far more simple for Red Bull. It's far more simple for Max. He just needs to maximise over the weekend. He needs to he needs to win, doesn't he? And hope that Lando doesn't reach the podium. It's remarkably simple. And obviously there are other permutations, but that's the most obvious one. And Max likes Abu Dhabi. He won 4 races there in a row between 2020 and 2023. And before last year, the last time he didn't reach the podium was 2017, which was the 3rd year of his career. So he has gone well there. And yes, Lando also went very well in Abu Dhabi last year, but Max will be very confident going in. He said before the race to Martin Brundle yesterday, he's like, I don't feel nervous. I don't get nervous. And you're just like, the juxtaposition between what Ian's talking about there with Lando and what I'm now talking about with Max is vast. It is a chasm, a gulf between them in how they are feeling, most likely heading into this, even though mathematically Lando has a far greater proposition, and those 2 points being so key that he picked up from Kimi Antonelli, because now he just needs to finish 3rd, whereas before, say Max is winning and Oscar is 2nd and Lando's 3rd, that would have put McLaren in a really difficult spot. So McLaren are probably quite relieved as well for that. But one thing that I will mention, I kind of alluded to it earlier, is the Spanish Grand Prix. That could be so key. And Ian, we had a good conversation about this actually at the time, because I did write about this, and you were saying, but it's whataboutism. And it is, because you can look back at so many different flashpoints across a year and go, oh, if that went differently, it changed this and this and this and this. But the difference with Max, and he says he won't kick himself, and you kind of believe him, because he just is so laissez-faire about this, and has been just so kind of, look, I've proven I'm the best driver across this year, even if I don't win the title. So, the title's just, a formality in some ways. But in Spain, he gave up a guaranteed 9 points. How critical they are. And what's different with that is that it was completely within his control. He hit George when he didn't need to. He could have just banked the 10 points for 5th, but he had to make a point. He had to make a statement, and that could come back to bite him. And that is a lesson that will ultimately be learned. He's already said, I've learned my lessons, and in the similar scenario next year, I wouldn't do the same thing, which, is great to hear from him. But this will really kind of, punctuate that lesson that Max has learned. So yeah, it's a fascinating fight, and it's a fascinating thing to look back on later in the year. But Max will be going in by far the most confident, I feel, out of the three.
Lando the title favourite, Max the dark horse, Ian, Oscar the plucky underdog. There's another way of putting it. He's the one who needs the biggest miracle. Victory is pretty much essential. It's what he must do to make life a bit easier for him, for the best odds to be in his favour. What I'm interested with Oscar is he was pretty speechless in Qatar. He wasn't happy. Let's look at his manager, Mark Webber. We've spoken about 2007, 2010. Mark was in that situation. Obviously, can now tell Oscar what it was like to be in that scenario of being one of four in the title fight, but can also help Oscar with dealing with failure, should obviously it not go Oscar's way. There's a lot Oscar can take from Mark in 2010 to take into this weekend, should I say.
It's Oscar in that nothing to lose scenario, isn't it? All he can do is everything to the best of his ability. If he can repeat what he did in Qatar, in Abu Dhabi, and Abu Dhabi should be a circuit that favours him and that car, although it was Oscar was second on the grid last year behind Lando. So nevertheless, it's another high grip circuit. It should prove favourable for Oscar. So all he can do is go out there, maximise every single session, give his absolute all in qualifying, and if he lands on pole, he couldn't have done any more. It's the best possible position he can be in, and then if he manages to get into turn one cleanly, then it's always just going to be about whatever Lando and Max do behind him. There's nothing really he can influence other than his own performance and ensure he races cleanly, he gets through the weekend as best as he possibly can, and then it's a case of however the dice may fall after that in terms of whether he will be the world champion. But he will look back on Qatar as just another one of those things this season that has really gone wrong for him, and thinking it should have been so much more than this. He's going to look back on what happened in Hungary. He's going to look back on what happened in Monza. He'll look back on his crashes in Azerbaijan, when Monza had got into his head. And then, of course, he's going to look back on Austin and Mexico and just wonder where the hell that car was that had been performing so beautifully before him for the most part up until those two Grand Prix. It's all really unravelled for Oscar over this final third of the season. And we talked about, Sam mentioned the word what if-isms, what about-isms. And for Oscar, there are going to be quite a number of those for him to look back on with what happened in Qatar, just the latest in that list.
And there's also not going to be a lot of time after the season to look back at the what-ifs and everything, because so soon 2026 will come into effect. Right, final, very, very simple question. Before we do our predictions, and you both should have known we'd be doing this, who wins the title? The title favourite, the dark horse, or the underdog? Sam, Lando, Max, or Oscar?
I said Lando at mid-season. I'm sticking with Lando. I think Max has been the standout performer, but I think Lando will just about get over the line. And those 2 points in Qatar could be critical to that, because he just needs to finish third. Doesn't need to worry about Oscar or Max.
Ian?
Yeah, he only requires a podium. And the bottom line is that the two McLarens and Max are just pretty much not head and shoulders above the rest of the field, but they are a good performance cushion ahead of the rest of the field, and it should be the same in Qatar. That should be the top three on the grid, as it was. No, it wasn't last year, actually. Max qualified 5th or 6th, if I remember right. But it nevertheless, it should be the top three on the grid this time around, and it should be the top three in the race. And if it's the top three in the race, then it does not matter where Lando finishes within that top three. I think it's just going to have the edge, barring any kind of McLaren strategic blunder, of course.
I'm going to go Oscar.
Nick, what about you, pal?
I'm going Oscar.
What?
I've just got a feeling it's happened before. If Oscar gets pole and can just clear off into the distance, we've seen as recently as last year what can happen at the first corner in Abu Dhabi, what can happen at the 5th corner in Abu Dhabi, the 6th corner. We've seen safety cars there before. We've seen chaos. I've just got a feeling, a really, really weird feeling. I just I don't think it'll be Lando. I don't know. Only time will tell. Will I be right? Will I be wrong? We'll have to find out next weekend. But finally, we need to do the last...
Just to conclude, just to very quickly conclude, because Oscar was second on the grid last year, Max was fifth. And Oscar got tagged by Max into turn one. And Lando went on... Yeah, Lando went on to win the race. And I think
he went
Max
on to win. Yeah. So... If something similar happens, who knows?
It goes, we know anything can happen. Look what happened in Qatar. Who would have expected that, for argument's sake? Yeah, it's a bold prediction. I got to say that, Nick. But
nothing to lose.
2007, 2010, are we going to get 2025?
Well, only time will tell. Right, let's do our final predictions of what has been a mental 2025 season, and representing the fans for the final race of the season is Linda from Scotland. Linda has predicted that Max Verstappen will claim pole position, Kimi Antonelli to finish in third, Russell in second, Lando to win and become world champion, Max Verstappen to finish in 10th, Lando Norris fastest lap, and McLaren fastest pit stop. Sam, for you, where are you going?
Was that Max Verstappen finishing 10th?
Max in 10th.
That's a big old claim. I like that.
No, Oscar.
Wow.
So I'm going pole position, Oscar Piastri. Max Verstappen win, Oscar second, Lando Norris third. Fastest lap, Lando Norris. Fastest pit stop, let's go McLaren. And for potentially the final time, 10th place will be Yuki Tsunoda, because it is looking like, and we're expecting this to be confirmed in the next day or so, that Yuki Tsunoda will not have a seat next season. So yes, I won't be able to make this prediction again for the foreseeable future at least. So sticking with Yuki, and obviously he came through for me in Qatar, so why not in Abu Dhabi?
That felt a bit emotional. That almost...
It did.
There's a tear in his eye. I swear there's a tear in his eye right now, folks.
I'm a creature of habit, and I've got to change my habits next year.
All right, I will make it really simple. Oscar pole, Oscar win, George Russell second, Max Verstappen third. We will say Oliver Behrman P10, McLaren fastest lap, Max fastest lap. Sorry, McLaren fastest pit stop, and I think that's everything. Ian.
You sure?
It is. Oscar, let's hold on. Oscar pole, Oscar win. Yeah, it has been. Oscar pole, Oscar win, George second, Max third, Max fastest lap, McLaren fastest pit stop, and Oliver Behrman in P10. That is everything.
Yeah, there you go.
Ian, as the reigning champ, well, as the newly crowned champion, where are you going for the final time this year?
Where am I going? Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because the top three are going to be Max, Oscar, and Lando.
Unless something happens.
Unless something happens, I know.
It doesn't really matter for you, Ian. Just go wild.
Say,
go out there.
Go wild.
I could just go wild.
Yeah.
But no, I've got to be
Franco
true to
Colapinto
the way
victory.
I've played. Got to be true to the way I've played this game over the course of the season.
Yeah.
So I'm not just going to go completely bonkers. So I am going to go Lando pole and win. I think he's going to finish with a flourish. And I'm going to go Max second, Oscar third. Fastest lap, Max. Fastest pit stop, Red Bull. And the 10th position, I am going to give it to Alex Albon.
And that's brilliant. And that brings an end to this week's episode of the Racing News 365 podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, will the title go to Max, Lando, or Oscar? Let us know in the comments below. Please do smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and the only thing left to say is we will see you this weekend for the season finale, the title deciding Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. See you later.
Catch our updates from the Yas Marina Circuit, folks. Take care until then.
Thanks for joining us as always.